Everyone, today is Tuesday, March 5th, 2019. This is a regular meeting of the Los Angeles Board of Police Commissioners. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Good morning. Let the record reflect Commissioner Sobroff, Decker, Bonner, Figueroa Villa, and Goldsmith are present, and we have a quorum.
Okay. Item number 5, closed session item 5A2 is being held for 1 week. So that will not be on our agenda today. Okay, let's start with the consent agenda items. Do we have any commissioner comments on 1A?
I do have a question.
Okay.
Someone from the department is available to just answer a little more background on 1A and the nature of the technology that will be purchased. As I understand it, it's so the department can comply with state law in the production of video and other material that's also required by state law. But I want to make sure I have a full understanding since it's $52,000.
Sure. Yes, Commissioner Decker. Is Gloria Gruby here? Ms. Gruby?
Not yet.
Okay.
No.
Commissioner Decker, she is not there, but I can discuss at least in generalities with you. The Office of Constitutional Policing and Policy will be responsible for overseeing the duplication and eventual distribution of those materials. Sadly, the department currently does not have the required or requisite numbers to put out that large volume of material. So this would be supplementing what we currently have to ensure that we can maintain compliance with deadlines and mandates as they appear to us now by law.
And as I understand, it's not just for the production, but to protect the privacy of individuals who might be picked up on certain videos. Is that also correct?
Absolutely, and that's part of the redaction process as well, to maintain, again, our compliance with the legal issues involved in that as well.
Very good. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you so much, Commissioner.
Nothing further.
Okay, do we have any public comments on 1A?
We have 3, sir. We have Adam Smith, Gina Viola, and Audrey George.
Okay.
And Mr. Herman, 4.
Okay. We're good.
Good morning. Jeez. No good mornings. Just want to, lift up that $52,000 from the Police Foundation is being considered for a donation. We'll see if it's accepted like it's accepted every week. But just want to lift up that constitutional policing, well, that sounds nice, is still something that we see is anytime the LAPD tries to work in concert with the federal government or under the guidelines of the federal government or in an interest of the national security interest, we're still seeing black communities, poor communities, brown communities are being targeted by this policing. So like all Police Foundation donations, I think this one should be denied. I know that you all, I noticed the chief's not here, but I know that Commander Nolte was demoted to captain from the Force Investigation Unit, and I noticed that in the report that this $51,000 is going to the Force Investigation Unit. Maybe you should look at what they're doing and what they have been doing under Commander Nolte before you start giving them more money. And I wanted to ask Mr. Tiefenk, who's not here, but maybe Ms. Vega can answer, or Steve, or anybody. What's the protocol for these reports when it says Michael Moore at the bottom, but it was signed by Chief Peters? Is that okay? Can people just sign other people's names, or?
We'll figure it out.
Gina Viola.
Of course. No.
Morning. I guess my comment would be DVD duplicators. That sounds like dated technology to me. It sounds like $52,000 on what is dated technology. So I would advise you to reject this and look into more cost-effective methods of technology for duplicating things. Everything is streaming now. Everything goes onto USB sticks. Why would you be getting DVD duplicators? Lots of people don't even have DVD players anymore. Thank you.
Next speaker,
Audrey
please.
George, followed by Mr. Herman.
Hi, we always mention how we're troubled about the lack of a real process. This is a very large donation from the LA Police Foundation, which we already know is fraught with a lot of conflict of interest. And these donations, aside from being large, should be considered not just for consent items, but they should actually be on the regular agenda. And I wanted to mention, I think the Office of Constitutional Policing and Policy is a joke. Anyway, it should be, I would take seriously when you have an office of human rights and civil rights rather than constitutional policing. Under this aegis, you allow the homeless to be targeted. You allow unconstitutional surveillance. You allow confiscation of property of homeless people and the destruction of that property. So much is allowed under that constitutional policing and policy that any donation to that should be looked at as if it's just throwing good money after bad.
Next speaker, please.
Mr. Herman, followed by Michael Novick and Hamid Khan.
Good morning. I appreciate the DBA of data tech. You know, we need to provide software, for example, that actually duplicates. But DVD is non-conforming to the requirements of what we could do with a CD. And if we have such technology, we can use our little flash drives to download this information and translate it to other nonprofit organizations to understand what the Office of Constitutional Policing is all about. You know, I admire good police officers who use constitutional policing. Incidentally, though, in Los Angeles, we're finding out that police foundations have a double standard with this police organization and the way they distribute monies called money laundering. And because of such data and tech that's important to the public, and Ms. Decker would agree with me, Washington wants to know more. They want to know exactly why Mr. Moore is up in Washington in that conference asking our government to assist in this duplication process. But in my public testimony, as you're hearing, I would like to see that the public's donation and contributions of donations fit into this police foundation formula because of the pattern and practice of money laundering and padding people's wallets behind closed doors in closed session. And by the way, under the Brown Act, yes, you do have a right to write any name you wish as long as you can acknowledge that you're here and present to participate. Thank you.
Michael Novick.
Yeah, in addition to the objections to taking any money from the police foundation, for all the reasons we've cited before about conflicts of interest, I want to focus on the question of constitutional policing. The Constitution was, at its inception, and continues to be today, a document that was written to enforce and uphold a system of white supremacy, land theft, and exploitation. It's a document that allowed for the theft of further native lands. It's a document that was silent on the question of slavery, except that it prevented it from being dealt with for over a generation. And as we've seen in the 2016 election, the institutions of the Electoral College and the U.S. Senate, which are completely undemocratic, are designed to maintain and uphold institutional influence of white supremacy within the governing structures of the United States. So I think that that's a very low bar for policing in this city. But in any event, under the Constitution, the 14th Amendment, which abolished slavery, has been interpreted by the acts of Congress that were carried out to implement it, was designed to eliminate what was called the badges and incidents of slavery. And it's quite clear that the level of state violence carried out against black people in this city and in this country are part of the badges and incidents of slavery. So if you are trying to have constitutional policing, you need to put a stop to the murders of black people in the city by the LAPD.
Hamid Khan.
Give me 1 second. So let's, and echoing Michael Novick's comments, let's look at the landscape of constitutional policing, and let's see if the commissioners have any idea of what we are talking about, right? Speculative policing, hunch-based policing, presumption of guilt. Dale Bonner, do you know how suspicious activity is defined in the SAR program? Suspicious activity, and I'll quote it for you, and Bert's sitting right here, observed behavior reasonably indicative of pre-operational planning of criminal and or terrorist activity. Try to break it down for me. Is that probable cause? Is that reasonable suspicion? Or any legal standard? Right. Observing behavior that reasonably indicates of somebody of thinking something wrong, pre-operational planning. That's your constitutional policing. Let's look at predictive policing. These folks are right here. They run predictive policing. Let's look at a person of interest, chronic offender bulletin, most wanted poster, but they're deemed a person of interest. Nothing charged, no active investigation, no crime has been committed, may have been committed in the past. That's constitutional policing. Let's look at license plate readers. That's constitutional policing. Let's look at Stingray technology. That's constitutional policing. So what you're doing is, and Eileen Decker, you're a U.S. attorney, tell me, observed behavior reasonably indicative of pre-operational planning. How do you factor that into your decisions about giving money to these guys? How do you factor that for that to even continue? And what happens under the guise of national security when we do the audit? We find out 31% of these secret files identify as individuals as black in a city that has a 9.4% black population. When you look at the gender count, 50% are black women. That is constitutional policing. So this is the same old bullshit impacting the same old communities because it is geared to assign criminality and to justify the presumption of guilt. That's the fucking constitutional policing.
We have no other comment cards on this item.
Okay, we have a motion for approval of consent item number 1A, please. We have a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, we're going to go to item number 2A. Morning.
Good morning, Commissioners. Bob Arcos from the Office of Operation. I'm joined by Captain Steve Carmona, Commanding Officer of Gang and Narcotic Division. And before you is our second comprehensive report on immigration reporting relative to SB 54. And just before I take any questions, I just want to make sure that I acknowledge the work that's done on these reports from Chief Gramala's office, Lieutenant Mario Moda, and Sergeant Roy Yu, and from Mr. Alakan's office, Detective David Sun, in helping compile these comprehensive statistics before you today. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner, comments, questions? Okay, go ahead. Okay. Let's start. Commissioner Bonner?
Yeah, good morning. So I just had one question. It comes up on page 19 of the report. This is with regard to the ICE detainer and release request. And in particular, just notes that there's been 1,049 detainer requests received and none that were honored, and the same with regard to the release notification. And can you just provide a little more context in terms of, I see these are requests, which suggest they're entirely discretionary, and just want to get some clarification as whether that's appropriate, and
Yes.
and is there any implication with denying the request, or one way or the other, or is that all they are? So it's
Yeah.
simply requests.
Some of the requests are in there, and they go beyond the scope of a probable cause for detention. Custody Services Division monitors these frequently and handles the influx of the requests and tracks them, and it's how we're able to keep track of this data for you.
Are they reviewed and then denied, or are they just summarily denied as a matter of course?
They are reviewed, but again, these are our detainer requests that go beyond the scope of the law to maintain a detainer beyond the probable cause discretion. The discussions that we've had for the last several years is that we will not honor these unless they are supported by a federal magistrate for a warrant for arrest to hold them.
Okay, thank you.
Sandy?
Well, I'll just go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to acknowledge and thank the department for the completion of the second annual report. The report is thorough, comprehensive, and inclusive of all joint task forces operating in alignment with the city's guidelines and the California Values Act of 2018. I would also like to highlight the department's compliance with its involvement with immigration-related activities, its proper use of the incident tracking system to better streamline reporting processes. I look forward to the department's continued efforts to abide to city and state requirements while emphasizing efforts to build trust with the communities we served. You know, Commissioner Shane Goldsmith and I were on the immigration subcommittee. We had several meetings. I want to mention that before we approved these guidelines, the process to involve community leaders, advocates, and all stakeholders' input was seriously taken into consideration when involving ICE. I thought that was the first time, well, besides the homeless committee that Shane and I were in, and we involved a lot of community outreach and engagement, is that this is the first time that I've ever, that I respect the police department for really being open to involving stakeholders in this process and us eventually approving these guidelines that don't involve ICE. So thank you so much, Chief Arcos and Captain Carmona.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
And thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Commissioners. And I just will add, I had the opportunity to represent the Chief of Police at the Law Enforcement Integration Task Force in Orlando, Florida at the IACP conference, and a lot of great interest in our work here with our relationship building and on the FAQs that were provided from the work from our commissioners and our Chief of Police. So it is known across the nation, the work that we're doing here. Thank you.
Commissioner Goldsmith?
I'll echo what Sandra has said and just appreciate all the work that went into this and all of the community organizing and advocacy that from the outside that helped make this a responsive process and a really good set of guidelines. In particular, for the new commissioners, this really, although it's in the context of implementing SB 54, really goes far beyond in terms of transparency and accountability. In particular, the level of detail of this report is not required and is a tremendous amount of work and just is all for the public. Also, the removing from the field ID cards, the question about nationality, is a huge demand of the community that, from their perspective, goes a long way to repairing the mistrust that has come as a result of a number of things, but just takes that out of the conversation with people, which is really important. And then also the fact that you have this agreement with ICE to not coordinate with them if the result of the task force or joint operation is going to be civil immigration enforcement, even if it's not, of course the LAPD would never be involved in civil immigration enforcement, but you won't even participate in the action if the result from ICE is going to be civil immigration enforcement, and then you go the even extra mile of following up with them to make sure that that's not happening or to find out if it is so that you can assess it and that becomes public. I mean, all of that is just extremely good and helpful. I'm so glad to hear that it's a model for other places in the nation, and just appreciate, look forward to the continued reports. And if issues do arise, I know that you will bring them to our attention. I know community members, if they see issues out there or hear about things or have concerns about the report, will bring them to us, and that will be in a public forum, and we will address it.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, subcommittee commissioners. Thanks. Do we have any public comments on item number 2A?
We have 7 cards. The first one, Fall Sock, Andre Kwan.
Morning, sir.
Which mic is it? This one? Cool. All right. Morning, everybody. I'm Paul Soak with the Youth Justice Coalition. 2 minutes doesn't really cover much room. Particularly, I just want to say that I am concerned. Many community members are concerned with the LAPD pulling people over for not having license plates and calling ICE on them, particularly because I was labeled an aggravated felon. I had a deportation order as an aggravated felon, but I became an aggravated felon because I was 17. Things went wrong, lack of resources. And so for those reasons, I ended up in the system. But I want to acknowledge that the history of immigration in this country starts with colonialism. Way back when Amerigo Vespucci found this land and called it America, and people called it America and came, it was designed to benefit white Western Europeans. And then when it came here, the naturalization laws of this land did not include slaves or descendants of slaves. They were for white Western Europeans. Not until the 14th Amendment, after the abolishment of slavery, did even slaves and descendants of slaves become or were able to become citizens of this land. Right, and so everything has benefited for white Western Europeans. You got to also remember that this land in California was not originally U.S. land. The idea of manifest destiny was for the benefit of white Western Europeans. The idea of manifest destiny concluded in an illegal war against Mexico to take this land of people that had already been colonized and took this land away from them. And when they came back to get their property and their livestock and their land, they were called bandidos. They were enforced upon by law enforcement, LA Rangers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so to be implicit in anything that involves with immigration is to be a piece of that history. LAPD needs to disentangle completely from ICE in any form or fashion. I want to also remind us that as recent as in the 1950s, there was something called Operation Wetback. These are things that are sanctioned by the U.S. government. Please do not forget these things. Please do not forget why people come to this land, because of the conditions that have been caused in our country due to a failed American foreign policies.
Andres Kwan with the ACLU, lawyer with the ACLU. There has been some progress, but commissioners, we cannot pat ourselves on the back. In fact, we must object to LAPD's practice as described in the report. There were 2 individuals who were effectively transferred to ICE. These fellow community members did not have to be plucked right out of our communities and likely torn from their families based on what? Routine traffic stops. Routine traffic stops. There's no reason LAPD should be in the business of doing immigration enforcement, period. These 2 arrests followed the most innocuous behavior, expired registration, and lack of license plates. These are not even arrestable offenses, yet LAPD held them for ICE to arrest them. There was no ICE detainer or notification request. ICE had no idea, yet LAPD affirmatively contacted ICE. Shame on the LAPD for this. This arrest sent a clear message that a mere traffic stop by LAPD could lead to the deportation of the driver or an occupant. Is this really the message LAPD wants to send? Also, we have no idea how old the robbery offense are, what has happened to the person since, whether they have children or grandchildren here, whether they've turned their lives around, as Paul has. Why is LAPD still in the business of deciding who gets deported? We must have a zero tolerance for ICE transfers, unless required by law. We live in LA. where a third of our community members are immigrants. And ICE transfers, especially these two that were reported, go against creating community trust and public safety, as it was mentioned before. As you well know, former Chief Beck concluded that the significant decrease of rape and sexual assault reporting in immigrant communities is a direct result of fear of the federal mass deportation machine. Again, we must have zero tolerance for ICE transfers.
Michael Novick, please, followed by Mr. Herman and Audrey George.
Yeah, I concur with everything that's been said about ICE, but I want to point out that this, thanks to the California Values Act, which was concerned about involvement of ICE, they were required to report on all the task forces, of which there are 30 task forces, resulting in over thousands of arrests, and those task forces involve the LAPD with the FBI, the DEA, Homeland Security, ATF, numerous other local police departments, the federal marshals, NCIS. And I think that you really need to question the whole question of these federalized task forces. The city of Portland scrapped its agreement with the FBI for a joint anti-terrorist task force, and shortly after that it was disclosed that the Portland police were providing information to organized white supremacist groups in Portland about the activities of anti-racists in Portland. So I think that this is a very, very problematic area, these task forces in general, not just around the question of collaboration with ICE, but around the embedding of the LAPD in a national security counterinsurgency policing structure. And I think you need to question that. I'll point out one of them which impacted directly. There's one that involves NCIS. I was involved with the Occupy the Ports action of Occupy Long Beach, and in that action we went to the ports. As it happened, it was in the city of Long Beach, but it was Occupy LA, and afterwards the reports came out that NCIS was one of the agencies, along with other ones that had infiltrated Occupy Los Angeles for intelligence gathering purposes. And I think that you need to look at the whole question of political policing, because the LAPD is becoming a political police force through these task forces.
I hear report echo Trump why $1K ICE is B-54 not reviewed under law, support not by DOJ. DOJ knows streamline of warrants unconstitution. I too, no good American, come to protest. Why? To build trust, so I too can navigate enforcement to task force. I not anti-Semitic. I do not hate. I simply know as requirements of report why you no comply to justice of Trump. I support Trump, for Trump knows law. Law knows Trump, because DOJ follow ICE. We need ICE to support immigration reform. Immigrants come here illegally and take away my benefits as citizen of America. I too go through due process. I know how to sign papers and get in line to wait for due process. So you know, I too understand Islam religion, heretics don't comply with ICE, need to get in line and pay their dues. I too follow due process, don't like immigration, and you must change your enforcement of police and support my new President Trump.
Audrey George, followed by Hamid Khan.
I'm sorry, sometimes the toxicity and hatefulness of public comments just takes my breath away and my spirit. I'm against any interagency task force that would result in the targeted, undocumented population being harmed in the way they have been. I'm confused by this report because although it details the heartbreaking story of people arrested for an unarrestable offense, both of them who had obviously done their time before for any felonies they may have committed in the past, being transferred over to ICE, whereas this report on page 18 or 19 says that there were 0 transfers. So I was confused by that. We've heard even just in the past week or so, we heard stories of people fleeing and having fatal crashes, fleeing from the DH, ICE and the Border Patrol. How can anyone question why they would be fleeing, even at the risk of their lives and others, when they could be deported for mere traffic stops?
Hamid Khan, followed by Adam Smith.
One second. Constant reminder that we got to do a freaking tutorial here every time. So this is a charting of the information sharing environment, that how information moves within public sector, private sector, law enforcement agencies, international agencies, the National Counterterrorism Center. You look at NSA, you look at everything else, and this is just scratching the surface. I think as far as the reports are concerned from the LAPD, we are very familiar that this is going to be just a very superficial checking of the box. The bigger question is that did the commissioner or Sandra or Shane Goldsmith in this subcommittee even ask just questions? Let's just show it to the community over there. Like, did they ask about LAPD's record management system? Did they ask about the record management system, that how that record management system is hooked up with the Law Enforcement Information Sharing Program, which is a program developed by DOJ? How that information that moves within various systems, so LAPD becomes a vehicle for providing information on people. Were those questions really asked? And these are the things that we need to, it's not just something whether they handed, of course, that's wrong that they handed 2 people to ICE. But it's like how they are a conduit for all the information that ends up in targeting undocumented immigrant members of our families and the community members. I think that's what really the issue lies about data-driven policing. That's where the issue lies, Shane Goldsmith, when we spoke about the record management system. This is a behemoth. I mean, we've come week after week, talked about this thing, about information sharing environment. We talked about, over here they spoke that how now as soon as a traffic citation is given, record management system ships it over to the Central Superior Court. So the Superior Court system has the information. So what we are trying to say is that for crying out loud, ask these goddamn questions, that where is data moving, who has access to information.
Next speaker, please.
The next speaker is Adam Smith.
I don't really have much to add, but I think about the targeting of the folks that were sent to ICE, these 2 people that one was parked in the red and one didn't have license plates. The first time I ever saw Commissioner President Steve Soboroff in traffic, about 18 months ago, he was driving down Pico Boulevard, and I tried to beep, but he didn't notice. I don't know. But he was driving his beautiful white Tesla this didn't have license plates. But like, and that seems like a, dumb comparison maybe, but like why isn't he targeted? If you're driving around the Pacific Palisades, there's plenty of people that don't have license plates. But it might seem
For
trivial.
the record, Smith, I have license plates. So maybe you were looking at somebody else. Give him 5 more seconds. That's not true. That's a lie.
All right.
Redeem yourself, child.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Steve. But the fact that Chief Arcos is the liaison between locking these people up and then handing them over to ICE just shows how entrenched the LAPD is in this type of work. And I also think about it like, you might say like, oh, well, 2, it's not a big deal. They were supposed criminals. They were convicted of a crime, regardless of when that was, and, why brown people might be convicted of more crimes than some of us. But what is this going to look like in the next few years when LA becomes a national special security whatever for the Olympics, and ICE has like a mandate to do more enforcement in and around LA?
Next speaker.
Gina Viola.
Mr. What's it, Smith? That's your last warning for disrupting the meeting. That's your last warning. Mr. Smith can leave the room. That's it. He can leave the room. Just a minute, please. Just a minute, please. He's leaving the room. Wait, we're not starting your time yet. Mr. Smith is leaving. Yeah, that way you won't have any disruption. Mr. Khan, I know you got the giggles today, but if you don't stop disrupting the meeting, I'm going to ask you to leave too. Okay? I know you came in to disrupt today, but it's okay. Have fun. Okay, let's go ahead. Go ahead.
That's the problem. The problem is we get up here and we say things thoughtfully, mindfully, well-researched, and we're ignored week after week after week. So yes, it's frustrating for you, I'm sure, for all these disruptions, but asking for things hasn't done anything, hasn't made any difference. So get used to it. Disruption is the only way we get your attention. So I wanted to talk to the field identification cards that Shane Goldsmith mentioned. I have personal knowledge with field identification cards and actually watched a young girl's life completely ruined because of field identification cards. So the fact that you are lifting up the fact that nationality is removed from these cards is so problematic for me, because what it shows is you just can't be there's no way to monitor your racist policing if you're removing the nationality from the field identification cards. You act like you're doing it as a means to be fair to the communities, but it's not. It's going to have the exact opposite effect. What I would like to see is that you remove the field identification card process altogether. This is something that should go away completely. You're only doing field identification cards on brown, black, and poor people. Those are the only people who get field identification cards written on them. So I would ask that you do away with that completely.
Next speaker.
And we have no other card on this item, sir?
We have a recommendation to approve the department's report. A second? All in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay. Next item. Morning. Thanks. We've read the report. Commissioner, questions, comments?
I do.
Okay.
Good morning.
Commissioner Decker?
Good morning, Commissioner.
Good morning. Would you mind just stating your names, introducing
Good morning.
yourself?
Cynthia Lee, Commanding Officer, Detective Support and Vice Division, who also oversees the Human Trafficking Unit.
And George Rodriguez, Office of Operations.
Thank you both. First, a very minor matter on my pagination is off. I think it's the first page. The date presented to the Board of Police Commissioners has to obviously be revised before it's sent to council. It says January 31st. But my questions relate to, I noticed in your report on page 4, it talks about Central Bureau and West Bureau having, if my notes are correct, part-time task force members as opposed to full-time in the other two bureaus. And I'm wondering, given the statistics and how successful it's been in the bureaus that are full-time, if the plan is to increase the task forces in the two bureaus that it's part-time.
Yes, ma'am. In fact, one of the things that we talked about with Councilwoman Nuri Martinez was the cost of implementing a full-time unit in those two bureaus. As you know, we do have a full-time unit in Valley and South Bureau at the moment. It all comes down to funding and personnel. What we do currently in West and Central Bureau is we pull from our vice units and we bring the officers together and conduct a task force considering the importance and the magnitude of human trafficking. Unfortunately, they also have their other duties as a vice unit and ABC checks and some of the other things that they do as well. So at this moment, we are unable to provide a full-time unit to West and Central Bureau, but that is something that we're definitely working towards. And I know that Councilwoman Martinez had stated that she was going to try and assist and try to get additional funding, or hopefully try to find additional funding so that those two bureaus could have a permanent unit assigned as South and Valley.
And was this report requested by council for that reason, to give the assessment of where the program is and where it might go with more funding?
That is correct. I know that they wanted some demographics and some additional items that we now captured as part of our monitoring of what their productivity is like or what it is that they are doing. And also we ended up including a cost benefit into that report so that she can see what the target is to bring all four bureaus with a permanent human trafficking task force.
And I do note that the federal funding, or the grant that was originally awarded several years ago, is now over, and the department has already had to absorb some of the costs of continuing its efforts in this area. Is that an accurate assessment?
Yes, that grant helped fund the overtime from the Human Trafficking Unit, not for the Bureau Task Force. But yes, the department has absorbed that in our budget.
Okay. Thank you very much for the report. I can't help but notice the number of individuals who have been rescued from human trafficking as a result of the efforts that being undertaken, and obviously want to support the efforts of the department continuing and expanding this program, particularly as it relates to minors who are who have become victims and hopefully survivors. My last question is, of course, dealing with the survivors and the efforts of the department in working with NGOs. I wonder if you can explain that collaboration that's going on.
Yes. Overseeing the Human Trafficking Unit, we have a very good relationship with a lot of NGOs and the collaboration with the Department of Probation, where whenever we rescue a minor, we contact the NGOs, Probation Department, Department of Children's Services, and we work as a cohesive team to ensure that this minor that is rescued is provided all the services that we can possibly provide as a entity, and working with other people and the NGOs.
And do they continue their support should there be a prosecution of some time, because that itself could be a very traumatic experience?
Yes, ma'am. The relationship between the Human Trafficking Unit and the NGOs continue from the beginning of this investigations all through whatever the minor needs.
Okay. Very good. Thank you.
And I believe we also do have collaborations and partnership with other NGOs to assist adults. So it's not only a collaborations for juveniles. We do have services so that if an individual wants out, or we do refer them to hopefully get them to get out of that lifestyle, providing them with the support services, whether it's a job, housing, education, whatever the case happens to be. We do make that available as well, and we do provide support through that prosecution, understanding the difficulties and the challenges that we face when an individual has to now testify against their handler or the person who had inducted them into this type of lifestyle.
Right. It's like it could be re-victimizing the survivor.
Correct.
In many instances.
Correct.
But you're right that support for all victims of this crime is incredibly important. Thank you.
Commissioner, may I just add, with regard to Captain Lee's leadership, when we're talking about the HTU, the call-outs and the training also need to be emphasized, I believe, because even though task forces may have small numbers, we're looking at educating the wider berth of the department, especially when we're talking about patrol officers who may very much so encounter at a radio call for service, at a traffic stop, the telltale signs of someone who is the victim of human trafficking. So I think the 93 call-outs that were done by the HTU under Captain Lee's leadership are very noteworthy because they were direct calls from patrol, from Metropolitan Division to say, I think we have something here. We need your expertise. So that is monopolizing that education piece to ensure that something doesn't slip through the cracks where officers are hesitant, maybe not very knowledgeable on certain signs and symbols of human trafficking. Her unit provides that guidance and leadership, and I think that's very important, in addition to the 33 training sessions. So I've known Captain Lee for a long time, but her leadership there, including her lieutenants, prior there, Lieutenant Lena Teague, Dion Watts, and others there have really helped to heighten the awareness on this subject matter.
Thank you, Chief. I truly appreciate that perspective and adding the importance of training more broadly. Yes. Because you're right, a patrol officer, if not informed and trained on the telltale signs, yes, might not understand what he or she is seeing at that moment. So thank you, Chief.
Yes, Commissioner. Thank you, Captain Lee.
Thank you, Chief.
Other questions?
Yep. Just one.
Bonner?
And it's on this same topic of training. I think at the conclusion of the report, at least at the end, it references the commitment to training department employees and investigating human trafficking crimes. Can you, looking at that comment about training department employees, and then also I'm going back to the prior page where in response to the request, you've listed the training conducted during 2018. How much of some of this, to me, appeared to be training of outside parties? Can you explain a little bit, like how much of this training, the relationship between the training referenced here on all these bullet items and the reference to the department training, and how much is internal versus external, directed towards internal versus external audiences?
Yes, sir. If I look at this correct, I believe, just looking at the bullet points, about 3 are internal. That are standardized training classes. We do train a lot of outside because we deal with the city attorney, district attorneys, and the NGOs. So wherever we can provide training to individuals, we are available to do that. Internally, we provide training to sexual assault table coordinators, because as Chief Grimala said, there are reports that come through that on surface may not meet the definition of what they assume is human trafficking, but we keep that open line of communication and training open so that we can talk, look at, and say, yeah, this on the surface it may just look like it's a sexual assault, but if you really look into it, it's a human trafficking. We train patrol officers, detectives, fire department. It's so broad of who we train that we, although it's internal, we train external also, but like I said, just with the detectives, the patrol officers, the vice school, the juvenile procedure school, wherever we can make an impact, that's who we train. The vice officers, because they do we're so specialized that they do see things that we don't see. And so just leaving that open line of communications, we're trained on a daily basis, or some is formalized, some is not.
Is are the items listed on page 6 of the report, is that the universe of training activities? In other words, you mentioned that at least 3 of those are directed to outside parties, but does that mean that the balance would reflect the sum and substance of all of the department training, or is there training that occurs outside of what's referenced here?
There's training that occurs outside of it. This was just like the major training, but there's training that occurs daily.
Just as an example, Commissioner, on a training that happened that I don't think is captured here, a couple of months ago, we invited all of the council generals from throughout the area. We brought them in, and one of the topics that one of our lieutenants out in Valley Bureau, who has been doing the human trafficking for quite a long time, Mark Evans, he provided training specific to human trafficking to all these council generals. As a result of that, all these council generals have requested for Mark to come in into his various groups to not only educate the community members that participate in whatever activities they have, but also their staff. As the chief alluded to, this is a very, very specialized type of activity that if you don't recognize it, it's going to go right past you. The tattoos, the branding, the lingo, the experiences that these folks are experiencing, if you don't have that baseline knowledge, you'll miss all those clues. So not only are we doing all of that internally with our officers to, as the chief alluded to, if you just happen to respond to a radio call, you can look for those little signs and symptoms that could tip you to the human trafficking piece, but we're also reaching out externally to groups like that. Our neighborhood councils, our CPABs, our neighborhood watch groups. We make this available to everyone and anyone, and we let them know that this training is available. I know that Mark Evans, Lieutenant Mark Evans, he's been doing this for quite some time. He's even written some books, which he makes free to the community members if they so desire. So this is an ongoing process. We do recognize the fact that it's extremely specialized. You have to have knowledge. It's not like a regular vice unit seeing a working person on the corner of Cross and Don't Cross. There's a lot of signs and symptoms that if you're not knowledgeable about or specific, you'll miss. And this victim or this opportunity that's right in front of us will be missed. So we're trying to make sure that we close that gap. And like the captain said, is make sure that those lines of communication are open so that we maintain that education available so we can try to reach as many folks as we can.
And forgive me, this may have been mentioned or referenced already, but if I'm reading the report correctly, that this is a problem that's impacting in particular African American women.
Unfortunately, yes, sir. Right.
And again, when you look at the list of training and the training you're referencing, is there training that is specifically directed to any of the NGOs or other organizations working directly with that population?
There is, and there's also a lot of training going on at the schools. One of the things that we notice, a lot of the human trafficking victims are younger. They're of high school age, and we're educating our educators also as to what those signs and symptoms are, what those tattoos look like, what the scriptures on their notebooks look like, to try to help us identify those individuals that are in that lifestyle without us really knowing.
Is there a way to get a more pointed report or briefing on that specific question in terms of, it's still a little difficult. I think captured in all of what you're saying is probably some more detail specifically on what NGOs and what programs. The question really is, if one were assuming, because it sounds like from what you're saying that you're reaching as far and wide as you can, but I'm still having a little trouble extrapolating from the raw data and the general references to training. If you were answering the question, what specifically are we doing directly to make sure that, since we know, I mean, if I'm reading this correctly, that there were no males captured in the picture and the overwhelming majority were African American females, it'd be helpful just to get a more specific comment on. I know this report really is responding to a specific set of questions from the council, so that's fine. But if in some follow-up, if you could provide a more specific comment on what we're doing or what we can do to channel any training and resources directly to that population.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
I have a question.
Sure.
Commander, I attended a community forum on human trafficking that Chief Scott put on before he left, maybe a year before he left, and it was really good. It included our international partners. It included all our partners, and it was packed with community people. It was in South LA. Because what I thought was really interesting is you had a lot of parents there that are able to, kids that ran away or kids that still live at home that are having some kinds of problems. And I left there shaking, really, to see how big and how serious this issue really is. And so I'd like to request that we may look at a follow-up forum. I know Scott had committed to do more of those. So I'd like to see that happen again. I don't know, back at South or maybe East or the Valley. But invite community and lots of parents to come and get educated also.
Absolutely. We'll touch bases with all our bureau chiefs and make sure that they incorporate those human trafficking forums into their plans. I know several organizations, to include the one that conducted that one, that they're more than willing to come out and provide that information. In addition to, they also bring survivors so that they can have that real life testimony of what those survivors went through, to try to elicit anyone that may be sitting out in the audience that's on the fence of coming out, that they can get that assistance. So we'll make sure we do that and incorporate that into their forum schedule.
Commissioner, we can also reach out to Detective Bureau as the overarching shepherd of these human trafficking task forces, which overarch the bureaus as well, to ensure we incorporate also a social media piece and a technology piece into this conversation as we look at past task forces, and Captain Lee was a part of them. Operation Reclaim, for example, and others, where we joined with our brothers and sisters at the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. Not only are the partnerships with the private sector absolutely critical to a continuity of proper services, as well as taking care of the victims so they are not at all criminalized or treated as suspects, as shamefully that was the case in the past for decades. We also need to highlight the fact that human trafficking has an insidious other nature, and it comes through the devices that people hold in their hands, the telephone, the cell phone, all types of social media, and education and awareness for parents and guardians and caregivers also must be a part of that conversation. We're happy to check back with you and shepherd something on a wider scale and bring in all of our partners to join us in that presentation.
Thank you.
Other commissioner comments? Do we have public comments on 2B?
We have 3 comment cards. We have Mr. Herman, Reverend, and Clint Blakely.
So, it's no surprise we're all aware about human trafficking. It first started with LAUSD, grown adults professionally sleeping with young children, introducing them to the action of what it's like to
Off
be
topic. Please be on topic, or I'll ask somebody else to come up and speak.
So as the statistics of report based on Nuri Martinez, an elected official at the capacity of Los Angeles, we truly are aware that, yes, civil rights were violated against the perpetrators. But it is an issue of DBA, doing business as. We have a police permit panel that allows DBAs like the Spearmint Rhino and all these other clubs to open
Speaker,
up.
please. Next speaker. He wasn't on it, I guarantee you.
No, what is it? Didn't tell me. Yeah, what is the topic?
Do you have a speaker card up? Well, then you should speak to the topic. 2B.
The next
2B.
speaker, please,
2B, you're
Reverend.
up.
So the topic is 2B.
Yes, sir.
All right, the number today is the number 2. The letter today is the number B. B for bastard, for Soberov. 2 for the too many times folks have been fucking killed by the Los Angeles Police Department. Since you don't want to clarify what fucking topic we're on, I'll clarify it for you. Human trafficking is a policing issue. Police carry human trafficking. Human trafficking only works.
Hold on for a sec.
Then what's the
I'll give you
problem?
time. Hold on for a second. Will you please take the sign down, officer? The swastika. Okay, go ahead. You can start over if you'd like. We'll give you a full 2 minutes. Okay?
Human trafficking only works through legitimized institutions. The Los Angeles Sheriff's Department right now is going through so many sexual misconduct allegations, it's fucking sick. Sheriff Villanueva had the audacity to bring somebody back into the Sheriff's Department who was beating the shit out of his wife. And you stand here proud to say you're partnering with the Sheriff's Department. LAPD is the most biggest human trafficking department I ever known. How do you get women into these spots if they're not covered by a legitimized institution? It's fucking sick. And for you over there to sit there like you're shaken by human trafficking, you ought to be shaken every time a family comes in here after these bastards come in here and fucking kill them. Where's your shakenness then? Where's your emotion then? This selective outrage is fucking bullshit. It's called policing humanism or fake humanism. You wanna carve out your own ways to be sympathetic. You gotta find ways to be sympathetic to all things happening in Los Angeles Police Department. Find all ways to be sympathetic when these families are coming here and you put your head down. You put your fucking head down. You should be fucking ashamed of yourself. LAPD, the county, has 450 murders. Neither Jackie Lacey has prosecuted, nor has the LAPD done anything to hold these cops accountable. Where is your shakiness then? And that's a rocking chair shaking your chair.
I want to know, where's your shakiness when gang members are killing each other in our neighborhood?
There it is.
Sit down. You can stop this.
There it is.
So, if you can't, your time's up. If you can't sit down, okay, next speaker. Thank you.
Clint Blakely.
Next speaker. If you don't sit down, would you please sit down? Okay, we're going to, I'm going to count to 3, and then we are going to go to closed session. 1, 2. Okay, you're up.
I was going to talk about the human trafficking report, but I cannot believe that you have the audacity to suggest that when police are killing black and brown folks in the street, you suggest the problems are these black and brown folks.
I think you ought to go on. You can come back for public comment on all of your public comments, but this is
You
regarding
just jumped
2B,
to that right
and
now.
Your time is over.
You guys got off
You can come
topic.
back during public comment. So do you want to speak on this item, or do you want to?
Sure, I'll talk about this item.
Thank you, sir.
From the report, 64% of the victims of human trafficking were black women. 9.6% of Los Angeles is black. How can there not be any even specific attempt to address that black women are specifically being targeted for human trafficking? How can that not be even a part of the solution here? And we all know that black and brown women who are at most vulnerable to human trafficking are not safe in the hands of police. The fact that they are in human trafficking positions in the first place is indicative of systemic racial inequities, which are directly caused, among other things, by the police.
Michael Novick.
Michael Novick.
Yeah, I'll follow on what was just said. Mr. Bonner brought up the fact that 64% of the young women or girls were African American, 57% of the adult women were African American. I'm trying to understand if that's an artifact of the fact that you launched this program originally with the sheriffs in Compton and the LAPD in 77th, or if it's a reflection of other statistics. I think that you have to look at a few things. For example, the fact that black girls in Los Angeles Unified School District are disproportionately suspended and expelled and victims of discipline by the school district out of proportion to the numbers in the school. That might leave them more vulnerable to being trafficked. I think you need to question yourselves about whether these talked about arrests for pimping, pandering, and commercial sex that were related to human trafficking. So I'm wondering about the overall arrests for pimping, pandering, and human commercial sex not related to human trafficking. Are those reflective of the same percentage breakdowns in terms of the fact that 64% of the people being arrested are African American? I don't know, but I'm wondering, and I'm shocked that nobody here asked that question. This is a completely inadequate report, both in terms of the overall policing that the human trafficking is picked out of, and in terms of the overall context of racism in the city of Los Angeles that contributes to these kind of statistics. So I think, again, you're derelict in your duty as police commissioners. Every single report that comes up here, you fail to ask the piercing questions that are needed to examine what the hell is going on.
Next speaker.
We have no other comment cards on this item.
Here we have a motion for approval of item number 2B, please. We have a second. All in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? Opposed. Okay. Item number 2C, regarding the arrest, booking, and charging audit.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Wendy Gamble, Police Performance Auditor for
Morning.
Acting CO for Jeff Phillips. This week, I have with me Sergeant Cynthia Chow.
Okay. I have a question. There were 3 items, 1D, 1G, and 1C, that showed low success rates in the audit, 54, 55, 66. But then when we get to the end, we talk about the recommendations, and it said that there were no recommendations. But then when you go past into the next paragraph, it talks about how there were changes. So
Basically, all the findings have been addressed. Most of them are admin in nature, but the arrest report headings were, for 1D.
Yes.
Those are things that we noted that could be easily fixed with training. So when we
Okay.
talked to the entities, that's something that they said they were going to do, is implement training at the supervisor meetings and management meetings.
Okay.
Same thing with 1G with the Marcy rights
Right.
cards being provided.
Right.
And then also, I also noted Objective 3E, completion of the arrest report approval checklist. That was
Yeah.
something else.
Right. Okay. But I mean,
If I can
in the
answer-
future, in the recommendations, I mean, you did in fact make recommendations, and the recommendations were in fact acted on, or these weren't recommendations.
Sir, if I
Yeah,
if
go
I can
ahead.
add,
I think you covered it.
because with our audits with recommendations,
Yeah.
we normally focus on systems and
I
policies
see.
and changes
I see.
in that respect.
I see.
But the policies and procedures
I
are
see.
already in place. It's all in the manual.
I see.
So because the policies and procedures are already in place.
So it's a
these are just
notification
more- Yes.
regarding the-
It's
okay.
it's
Okay, I
more of,
understand.
instead of
Okay.
recommending, can you please follow manual section?
Okay, good.
It's already in place. So a lot of the responses that we got back
Okay.
was an indication that they will train.
Okay, thanks for clarifying. Other questions? Commissioner?
Good morning.
Morning.
I note in the report that you said that the categories being reviewed were based on a prior determination of risk and liability to the city, and that's how those categories were originally identified and used in prior audits. My question is that analysis updated to take into account current risk and liability to the city? In other words, you're not just sticking to the same categories with every successive audit, you're doing some sort of review
We
to
are.
determine if those categories are still relevant?
Yes, we do a risk assessment before every audit to make sure the categories are relevant, yes.
Okay. And I have a question on the sample size. I understand how you got to, or I think I understand how you got to your statistically relevant 76 valid samples. But then I note when you go into the specific categories, sometimes the sample size is extremely small. I think in one case as low as 7 or 11. And it just strikes me that can't really be a statistically valid sample size, but I am not a statistician. So I wonder if you can explain that a little bit to me without going into the true details of statistical analysis.
Yeah,
it just seems very low.
Yeah, I don't know if you're referring to probably 1G.
1G and I think 1H, where it went down to 7 reports being evaluated on confidentiality, and that's obviously a very concerning topic.
Yes, the sample size will often change depending on what's applicable for the objective. So if it's not applicable for the objective, we put in the narrative, that is why the sample size changes. So we don't look at everything in that particular sample size. So we look at what's applicable, and in that particular one, there were 7 that were applicable, and out of the 7, they were all.
Right. It just seems 7's a very low number to determine whether the department's in compliance or not in compliance with a particular category. And I understand you're looking at the specialized units, and so the size gets increasingly smaller.
Right, because in this particular objective, we were looking at issue of a confidentiality form. They didn't apply to all of the 76.
If I can add, the way that we obtain the population is through a data run, and based on the data run, we ask for arrests. And the specific attributes that we can ask them to filter cannot provide us a question of, can you give me all arrests involving confidentiality forms? Because of that, or even give me all of your arrests that included Marcy's rights cards. So because they can't filter out that way, we can only ask for the number of arrests made during a certain time. And then based on that, whatever we get that involves that 4,000 I think we began with, and then get the sample, and then based on that sample is whatever comes across with a confidentiality form or involving a Marcy's rights card, then we can take a look at it. But other than that, if we could filter out and ask for, say, all confidentiality forms for 6 months, we would do that.
Right. It's just the system, that's what the system allows us to do.
The system does not allow us to do that.
I understand. That's very helpful. Thank you both for that explanation. And just to follow up on Commissioner Soberoff's question, I did have a question on the category that I guess achieved the lowest results, the 66% on completion of arrest approval checklist, 3E.
Yeah, 3E.
3E. My question was, why were there no recommendations? And I take it that your determination is the policies exist. This is a training issue. Is that accurate? Okay,
exactly.
I understand. I follow. Thank you.
Commissioner, I think it's important that the auditors meet with the commands and the commanding officers to kind of personalize the results of the audit so that that training piece can really be drilled down to the specificity of what the issues were. So I know as a recipient, as a commanding officer, when audit division would come, they're extremely thorough. So just to give you some background on the end user of the audit data and how we use it to improve systems or the information that we are pushing down to the line officers, detectives, et cetera, to ensure a policy compliance. They do kind of walk us through that process to make sure that we are giving it the proper attention.
Ma'am, sorry, Jeff Burt from Office of Constitutional Policing and Policy. To Chief Kamala's point, for example, there's one statistic about arrest report headings, and one division stood out. Metropolitan had 13 instances when they didn't put in a canvassing heading. Personally, when I see numbers like that, either if Jeffrey Phillips doesn't do it, I reach out. I talked to John Tippett, the captain of the Metropolitan Division, recently about this very finding. He's ensured that his lieutenants gave training and the supervisors gave training. So I really just want to reemphasize, and we don't come in with a recommendation. It's because For years, we've tried to cull those down, to boil them down, that if we can handle it in an action taken by meeting with the divisions, and these auditors are phenomenal, David Kennedy as well, they meet with the COs and go over this, and as you'll see in some of the reports have responses attached, some don't, but in this case, all parties responded to us.
Perfect, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Commissioner Bonner.
Yeah, I had a question. It's about Table 1 on page 3. This is the part of the report where typically there's a comparison to or a reference to a prior report, and then a comparison that shows kind of how the standard was either, the level of meeting the standards was either increased or decreased. And here, if I'm reading this correctly, the prior report was looking at the patrol units, and this one is specialized. And so is that apples to apples? In other words, how do we know the level of, I wouldn't say compliance, but how do we know how well patrol is doing and meeting the standards now, if this is really showing us a different part of the operation?
And I agree with you. This one is specialized, so in order to make it apples to apples, we would have to compare the patrol units from 2015, 2016. But we hadn't looked at the specialized entities before, so we thought it would be significant to do that this time. So this table just kind of gives you an idea of what compared it to patrol arrest. But next time we can compare the specialized, because we will have already established this first audit, and we can then have apples to apples.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm understanding correctly, I assume at some point in the future there will be a subsequent report looking at patrol, right, and there'll be a subsequent report looking
right,
at specialized units, and then there's a better comparison so that we know
right,
how well each unit is doing and increasing their
exactly. But we had to start somewhere, and this was our first time looking at specialized. So next time, yes, we will make that comparison.
Got it.
And
Thank
with
you.
If I can add, with the comparison between the two, and you're asking whether it's the comparison is equal, we look at patrol geographic areas quite often, so they're kind of in tune with what's required, especially when they make arrests day in and day out. Specialized, not so much, because they're specialized, and we haven't looked at specialized before. And so I personally had expected the numbers to be a little bit lower, but actually they compared quite well with patrol. So we were really pleased. So for the numbers, they're actually pretty good.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we'll move to public comment. Do we have any public comments on 2C?
We have 3 cards. We have Mr. Herman, Michael Novick, and Regi.
So, as the analyst pointed out, thank you, Ms. Decker, regarding the racial profiling and statistics of arrest, booking, and charging audits, I know particular people who've been arrested here based on illegal charges simply for a violation of the Brown Act. And as I would like to quote an individual, not by name, who said, "I think you are covered. I see, 3E. But no, the recommendation of confidentiality explains the racial profiling of my brothers. See? Dark-skinned people like myself are detained by false arrests. We become the ratio of that profile, such as Wayne Spindler for the record, Michael Hunt for the record, individual advocates. Because, again, we're here to declare what the charging audit facts are. Facts are African Americans are constantly racial profiled, number one. Number two, dark-skinned people or people of color like myself who have a foreign, non-English speaking name are arrested. But I'm not against haters, because Steve Soboroff is.
Next speaker, please.
Michael Novick, please.
Yeah, I think this is another incidence of not being able to see the forest for the trees. You're looking at the minutia of these audits without looking at the base data that you're auditing. So this is an example of basically sort of making sure there's a CYA paper trail and all the I's are dotted, all the T's are crossed, but you're not looking at who's getting arrested, who's getting booked. You're not looking at the fact that arrests in Los Angeles overall went down and arrests of homeless people went up. Bear with me. A number of years ago, I was living in New York still. I worked for the Veer Institute of Justice, which tries to do work to prove that people should be released on their own recognizance. We did a study of arrests in the Manhattan criminal courts. We looked at cases to see whether more bench warrants were issued for people who were OR'd as opposed to people who were out on bail and had a cash bond, and we found no appreciable difference. But in looking at the reports, we opened up, the criminal court records for hundreds and hundreds of cases in Manhattan, and every single one, the complainant for the crime was a police officer. And every single complaint was identical. It was either that the officer saw a bag of white powder dropped, giving them probable cause to make an arrest for possession of narcotics, or the police officer was approached in a toilet on the subway and made an arrest for, soliciting sodomy. And, after you read 5 of these, you realize that they were lying through their teeth, that they were told by the district attorney what they had to do to make an arrest, and they wrote out a report that covered that. So I think that you need to dig deeper into why people are being arrested, who's being arrested, and not just making sure that the paper trail on the arrest covers your ass.
For any non-law enforcement person in here, can you articulate what they just said? Right? You should be alarmed by that. They can just talk up here with language that you don't understand. That's very important. Because this report, how stupid as it sounds, and as a black man, are you from Los Angeles? Are you? No, I'm not. That's the problem? Okay. How someone is arrested is more important for why they were arrested. As black people, we are arrested because we are black first. Yeah. They put drugs in Los Angeles community to criminalize the black community, not because we were fucking leprechauns, because we were fucking black. That's right. And they know loopholes on how to arrest you. That's what's not showing up in this report. That should fucking scare the shit out of you. Bonner? I was in jail at the age of 6 years old. Didn't have a damn chance to understand what racism was before racism happened. Because the system said, I know a way to put this young boy in jail without any system realizing it. How you're arrested is more important for why you're arrested. You think the war on drugs is because these folks fucking had, a fucking strike of fucking consciousness to rid drugs of our community? No! LAPD is rich today. This asshole is rich today because of the war on fucking drugs.
Next speaker.
He gets a pension because of the war on fucking drugs. How we are arrested.
Next speaker, please.
We have no other speaker cards on this item, sir.
Motion for approval of 2C. A motion for approval of 2C, please? Second, all in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay, we're on 2D now. Department's report regarding non-categorical use of force investigations audit. Do you have any commissioner questions on that audit? Congratulations on that audit, frankly. Any questions? Do you have any public comments on item number 2D?
We have two. We have Mr. Herman and Michael Novick.
Okay. Mr. Novick, you can go ahead. You're closest to the microphone, sir. Go ahead. Mr. Herman, you're next. Go ahead. Do you want to speak or no? We didn't have any commissioner questions of the report. We've read the report. You can start the clock, please.
I'm curious why they skipped 2017. It says prior year's audit there, 2016, 2018. This is about digital video, body-worn camera. I know that the killing of Eric Rivera, that the mother is still trying to get all the video, and that somehow the door of the car interfered with the view of the shooting of Eric Rivera. So I'm wondering why you found such a satisfactory inclusion of the body-worn and digital in-car video, when, at least in that one case that I know of, it was not able to take the incident that took place.
Herman?
So, categorically, the use of force needs an investigation audit? Isn't that a part of the practice and pattern? Haven't we heard that term before? Practice and pattern? It's infection and disease that causes an audit. And we have to break out the formula of pi versus declaratory civil right violations based on a non-biased, prejudice, discriminatory issue of use of force. And it always happens to my brothers. Number one, why are African Americans a target by illegal use of force and you violate their civil rights? Why is it a person of color and speaks and not be able to read and understand? So you see, the pastor is right. There's something wrong with our audits that's not truly investigating the issues of the Inspector General's report. And the Inspector General, for the record, Mr. Mark Smith, should be investigated by the Department of Justice as part of the collaborator team of commissioners who violate civil rights issues and have no regard for human life like Jew Mr. Soboroff.
We do have an additional card, sir.
Well, we'll take them during public comment. Okay. Thank you. Cards have to be turned in on time, and then we'll take them. Otherwise, you have time during public comment. Number 2E. Oh, yeah. We have a motion to approve the report 2D. Have a second? All those in favor? Aye. Okay, item number 2E is the department's report regarding to the mental evaluation unit report on alternatives to police intervention. Morning.
Good morning, commissioners, chief.
Do we have any commissioner questions or comments regarding 2E?
Sure. Just want to thank you so much for all your work on this. I'm very excited about the multiple ideas you have for diverting mental health calls to more appropriate mental health service responses that would save LAPD resources for real threats to public safety and law enforcement issues. So I mean, I think it would be great if you could super briefly just summarize each of the ideas. And I think what wasn't fully detailed in the report is just kind of the status of being able to actually expand or create these programs, and in particular, the last one that I don't have it in front of me, but that requires additional resources from DMH. Just kind of what are the possibilities there with the Department of Mental Health to expand their resources in partnership with you?
Excellent.
Once again, good morning, Commission. Captain Cynthia Lee from DSVD, overseer of Crisis Response Support Section, who oversees Mental Evaluation Unit. I will let Lieutenant Brian Bixler, who's the OIC of MEU, respond to your question, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am. Chief, Commissioners. So the scope of the problem we first looked at is there's a lot of calls that come in to 911, which is the primary way our police officers end up interacting with persons suffering with a mental health crisis, is through the 911 system. So that is kind of the focus of my report, is how can we get from that point where people call 911 to get help and get those to the right resources. So the first piece I looked at was suicide calls. People in our society, when they don't know a suicide hotline number, will call 911 for that help. So the first idea is, how do we more appropriately divert those resources? Two programs I looked at, one in Houston and one in Portland, Oregon. And the one in Houston did not necessarily deal with suicides, but they do divert calls to mental health resources. And in Portland, they actually have started diverting those 911 calls where somebody is suicidal but there's no threat to public safety, which means they're in their own home. They may even have pills, or they may have means to which to do it, but there's nobody else threatened. Those calls are immediately diverted to a suicide hotline, which up there is actually a county program, so there's no outside program there. But here what we're looking at is D.D. Hirsch, which is our largest suicide prevention hotline. They have trained counselors. They actually train some of our SWAT team members on crisis negotiation. So that piece, we wrote a federal grant 2.5 years ago, which we did not get because they said LAPD already has too much money for those programs, but it wasn't going to go to us. It was going to go to D.D. Hirsch. It was a $300,000 grant. So that money is going to have to come from somewhere. Fortunately, D.D. Hirsch is a county contractor. So we are working with Department of Mental Health to find ways to funnel that already state money that comes through the county for those programs to help fund the additional counselors that will be needed. So essentially it would work like this. You'd have somebody call 911. They may say they want to commit suicide. They're not out in public. They don't have a weapon. And generally right now we would send a police car. So in this case, we would actually do a warm handoff. We'd connect them with that suicide hotline through a dedicated line, and let that suicide counselor deal with that person and get them the appropriate resources they need. If it became apparent that police intervention was needed, they were now threatening somebody else, they would have a dedicated line to come right back to our 911 call center that could dispatch a unit at that point. So that's how that works. The next piece you asked about, Commissioner, was when it is not suicidal, but it is we'd call it a low acuity mental health crisis that can be diverted to what's called PMRT, or the Psychiatric Mobile Response Teams, which is a county program where there's 2 clinicians from the Department of Mental Health that would respond. Right now, they just don't have enough of them. Director Jonathan Sharon of DMH is working actively at reorganizing his department or his agency and providing more of those units. And I don't have numbers. I don't know how quickly that's going to happen, but we want to use that for those low acuity calls to divert them. There's actually a manual section in our communications manual that allows for them to do that. It's just that when people call and they want immediate help and they get an answer from Access that says we'll be there tomorrow, that's just not good for a lot of people. They want help now. If a family is in crisis, they want somebody there now. So we're working with DMH to work out those, and I don't have a timeline for that, but I do know our suicide diversion piece is moving forward. And Chief has directed me to get that done by June, and I will do my very best with the DMH to see if that can happen.
Great, thank you.
Ma'am.
Other questions?
If you want to go first. It would seem our 911 dispatchers will need additional training in order to ferret out the appropriate calls to use this? Can you explain how that is being factored into your planning?
That is going to be one of the biggest pieces, basically it'll be the training. We already have an 8-hour training developed for our dispatchers on dealing with persons in a mental health crisis. So all we need to add to that is the criteria and how they're going to cross-train with our DD Hirsch specialists on what to look for, but what to ask. And we're also going to use Portland's, their decision tree that we're going to help kind of co-opt and use that. But training our PSRs and our call takers is going to be a huge piece of this. That's because that's where it's going to come from. So you're absolutely right, and we're working on that.
And so you're consulting with or modeling after the Houston and Portland models. How successful have they been in achieving the results they're seeking?
Houston, I will say they do the more low acuity calls, so not suicide. Portland, however, diverts about 100 calls per month to their call center, which means those are 100 calls that would have been dispatched, and they're not. And they've had great success at diverting those calls. For us, our numbers are slightly higher, so I'd anticipate we'd have at least 100 calls. So we're modeling, they're doing a very good job. Houston has done a very good job at also diverting those low acuity calls, although not suicides, but calls they would have generally gone to or that may have stayed in the call dispatch queue for an hour where somebody's waiting for help. Now they give them right to a counselor.
How are they defining success in Portland? Is it 100 calls that the police department did not have to take care of, or are they following through to see 100 people actually got the help that they needed? How are they defining success?
The police department is defining it as calls that they don't have to handle. However, their health agency is the one that would follow up with those cases and follow them through. So in our case, DMH being a county contracted provider would also do the same thing, where they would follow those cases through to make sure it wasn't just not police response, but now are they getting the help they need? Is a clinician following up with that? So that's how they're determining success. I don't have Portland's numbers as far as that goes.
So for us, we would definitely want to know not just calls diverted that the department didn't have to handle, but the ultimate success in getting people down the road. So correlating that with the Department of Health Services.
Correct. And when we did our federal grant, we had built in a whole piece to analyze the outcomes. And so but DD Hirsch already has outcomes tracking. Okay. So we would be able to immediately say, and we're going to develop a tracking system to how many calls did they receive from our 911 call center and what was the outcome of those calls.
Excellent. Sorry.
Commissioner Bonner?
Yes, thank you. Just a couple of questions. I'm going on, starting on page 1 of the report. And this is in reference to the first question at the it says that it can be surmised that 1,754 contacts could have been diverted to a non-police response. Is this is just in 2018?
Correct, sir. Those are numbers from 2018.
Do we have or have access to data on any broader period of time?
We can pull numbers for any
prior years. Yes.
Okay. All right. And then in the disposition code, the referral indication of mental illness, the 1,754. What if anything do we know about the demographics of people in of those 1,754 cases?
I don't know if there's a way to pull that out. That comes from communications division, and you'd have to probably query each individual call that came out. And I don't have access to that. So that was simply when a police officer gets a call, they're required, if there is any mental health, it comes out as a mental health call, or they determine there's mental health involved, they're required to use a specific mental health disposition code. So that's all I pulled from there. And I would have to go back to communications division to see if it's possible to pull demographics from that number.
Could you do that?
I will ask.
You don't do it right now, but if you could do it, please, and let us know. I'm trying to understand also, with regard to this code, the other areas kind of speak, I think, a little more directly to how some triaging is done. For example, with the 911 suicide diversion, it talks about the crisis counselor could work with the caller to determine appropriate resources and so on. How is that handled relative to the Homeless Services Authority program? I wasn't able to capture how, practically speaking, how this determination is made.
That is actually a separate program it's run through LASA, so I don't have any direct input into that or know how that program how they do their work. That was looking at other cities that have similar apps to be able to allow the community to address those problems. So this would be for a community member, not necessarily for a police officer to use that. It's a community app where the community would see somebody on the street. They would be able to report directly to LASA. There's a person on this corner who needs help, and that's the reporting mechanism there. So I don't know how they do their triage at that point because that's not something that we're involved in any way.
Is that knowable?
I'm sorry?
I appreciate the fact that you don't know it. Is it knowable?
I don't know what information LASA has. I would have to ask.
Right. And what I'm asking is, could someone make
them.
inquiry to
Yes,
understand how that's handled relative to that category? I'd appreciate that. And a couple of questions at the bottom of page 2 that list a number of steps that are being worked on, developing a list of call types to be diverted and develop a policy on how calls will be diverted, et cetera. Is there any existing policy in this area already, or is this new territory?
For the LAPD?
Yes.
There is no existing policy. This is new territory.
And is the reference to the policy on line 2, is that I think what I'm a little confused about is I would expect to see a policy addressing all of these items, I think, in 1 through 5. Okay. And I'm seeing the reference to developing a policy on number 2 with regard to how calls will be diverted, but it's not clear to me, at least from reading this, how that relates to the other items and whether it would be whether it could or should be captured into a broader policy, or would the policy only be limited to how calls are diverted? There's a list of activity here. Right. You're going to develop a list of call types to be diverted. You're going to draft an MOU with Dr. Orthidi Hirsch, develop and implement training for operators, and implement a program in the third quarter. What I'm asking is, it would seem to me that all of that would be captured under potentially, or there's elements of the policy that may touch on each of those areas.
Mr. Bonner, I would say that it would be a part of the umbrella of what the 911 suicide diversion program for the LAPD would look like. So that would be under that umbrella as well. And that would include dispatch policy and all of the other things that are enumerated in 1 through 5.
And is it the intention that we'll see this before? I know it says that you're planning to implement in the third quarter. Is it the intention to have some additional review by the commission before this?
We're happy to do that, Mr. Bonner, and get the input of the commissioners subcommittee as well, whatever you deem would create a better understanding, and also suggestivity and guidance from the commission with regard to what you would like to see as part of that, to make sure we've made all of the requisite needs addressed as well.
Good.
Okay. I would like to have some additional time to do some more work in the area. So is this an informational report, I presume, for today only?
Yes, I think the purpose is to notionalize.
This is not the policy adopting the policy.
No, this is a notionalization of where we are moving forward. And I have to say, Lieutenant Brian Bixler has always been at the forefront of trying to move this department forward with regard to the MHIT training, his relationships with our partners, especially within the mental health disciplines and community. And we're very proud that he is helping to shepherd these de-escalation mechanisms forward to decrease the opportunity for officers to even have to be brought into a mental health crisis conversation if we had other possible means, if appropriate, to bring other stakeholders in the conversation.
And you just reminded me, by the way, that I had a couple of additional quick questions. This is with regard to the community education that's referenced on page 3. And it talks about the quarterly stakeholder meetings, and that they include community members, service providers, law enforcement, with an average attendance of 75. Does anyone have any information really, excuse me, as to how many of the 75 are generally community members versus the those from various allied agencies? Like, what's the level of participation?
I don't know the exact number, sir, and I'll let Lieutenant Bick speak on that, but our Mental Evaluation Unit has a senior lead officer for each bureau. So whether it's the quarterly meetings or weekly meetings, they have meetings with the community members. They're not agencies or, other law enforcement agencies. They're actually community members who have a stake in what's going on in their communities.
And do we know where the information from those conversations, what's done with the information that is captured in those conversations?
So we capture who is there, a sign-in sheet. As far as what information is shared, generally it is we bring in stakeholders to present. So a lot of it is bringing in all the various stakeholders that are involved, and I would say the community members. It's a smaller percentage. Most of it is NGOs, Department of Mental Health, clinicians, and other organizations getting together to learn what each other's services have and to be able to better understand how to navigate people through the various resources that are in the community. That information is captured through our senior lead officer program, and so we have, like I said, who has shown up. But generally those are, I will present on what we do in the LAPD, how we're structured, and then we'll bring in, for instance, last time it was the LA Unified School District Police Department presented on their co-deployed team when they have a LAUSD clinician and a LAUSD police officer working together to tackle some of the issues on their campus, which is a new program. So we're using that forum to allow networking in these disciplines.
Okay. And I think what my final question is actually for Chief Grimala. Yes. Why is this under the Detective Support and Vice Division?
It has historically been under Detective Bureau because of the variety of networking and relationships that are intertwined with our investigative services that the department provides. So that is just where it has fallen traditionally in the department's organizational chart.
But this is I mean, with regard to mental health, that's the best place we have to put it in your.
I think detective support, so the mechanism that MEU, Mental Evaluation Unit, supports investigative functions and looking into situations that may fall into this realm, that's where it has been housed thus far.
Okay, thank you. So again, we're just approving this we're just accepting this for information. So I'd like to address some additional questions as we consider the policy when it comes back to the commission.
Further though, on the line that you're talking about, the Community Health Resources Guide, is that online? Will it be online? How does the public access it?
The public, I don't know if it's on our external, but it's on our internal, and it's on every police station. It's the trifold. But we can put that out on the external LAN. I will just have to look at how to do that and get permission to do that.
Yeah. Will you try and do that? I think it's important.
And President Soboroff, also, I think the public education piece will be very important as we socialize people before any type of rollout takes place, so people know this program exists, how it can be accessed, and that there are a variety of means that community members can seek mental health services. So a PSA, for example, where the department is partnering with the private sector partners, our county partners, DMH as well, I think is going to be critical to the face of this program and people having confidence to use it.
Agree. Okay, do we have any public comments on this item?
We have Mr. Herman. We have 5 cards. We have Mr. Herman, Michael Novick, Kai Utsumi, Reverend, and Clint Blakely.
Americans and diplomatic political beast. For the record, under P0452984, telephone number 626-262-4510, regarding programmatic mental health. How would I know this if I was at the Metropolitan Courthouse Division 95D under Judge Laura, for the record, Streimmer. Ms. Streimmer, what a beautiful judge.
This is off topic. This isn't about you. This is about the relative to the mental health evaluation unit report.
Intervention.
Let's go on topic, please.
And so far, mental health evaluation by police should not be authorized because they are inadequately trained to provide mental health service. That's true. That's why we go to hospitals. That's why we seek professional psychiatry. Not mental health professionals. And you are not professionals in that field. That's right. You discriminate, you are prejudiced, and you violate the civil rights of individuals who suffer from mental health. You have a developer there who has no engagement with those who are disabled. And people suffering from invisible disabilities like myself truly want to say to Steve Soboroff, gently and politely, God bless America, God bless Trump.
Trump is a racist, in the words of his attorney, Michael Cohen.
Go ahead.
Okay, so once again, the police commission is completely failing in its responsibility. The key item in this entire report was skipped over. It says a program of this type would have three measurable impacts. Impact number 2, a reduction in attempt or possible suicide by cop incidents. So what are we talking about? This is not bloodless bureaucraties. This is life and death. This is blood on their hands, and they're trying to figure out a way to kill fewer people than they do year in and year out. Well, that's to be acknowledged and admired, but speak to the fucking facts. The facts are it's not only people who call because they're going to commit suicide who get killed by the police when they're in mental distress. It's everybody that the police comes across who's in mental distress. Vastly disproportionate number of the victims of police violence, even more than in terms of racism, are people in mental distress and having psychological issues, and the police kill them. So the first rule, the first procedure you want to come with is not to divert people calling about suicide, because they're not trying to commit suicide by cop. They're just upset, and the cops fucking kill them. So when the cops find somebody on the street in mental distress, back the fuck off and call the Department of Mental Health Services to deal with the problem, because you're completely not equipped to deal with it. You're going to kill somebody for no damn reason.
That's it.
And the reason the Department of Mental Health doesn't have enough people to deal with the problem is because spending so much fucking money on the police.
Thank you.
Kai Utsumi.
Asking for more money. You don't want goddamn money.
It's a farce when the police commission is interviewing police people in the same club on the issue of mental illness. The police are primarily trained for brute force. That's their first training. That's why there's so much killing, because they don't know anything else. And the LAPD is inherently a racist organization as an institution, and that racism spreads to individual officers. LAPD, what do they think of a person that's loud? They don't like it. They don't like loud people. All right? Well, loud is a human expression of emotion, of anger. One of the greatest American woman poet, Audre Lorde, a black woman, wrote about loud. And she told the black people, keep being loud. And this fucking police department, they go and kill kill especially black, brown, and loud people. They do not qualify to be talking about mental illness. That belongs to full-time social workers. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Reverend?
So true, so clear, and so prevalent. This asshole said the policy is a 2019 policy. That lets you know these bastards don't care about de-escalation. Because de-escalation is not just it's not just a place you can house in a certain part of the LAPD. De-escalation should be something that should be housed in all of the fucking departments. Should be showing up to nobody's place willing to shoot and blow their asses up. There are names that have suffered because you show up with not de-escalation. Ezell Ford having a mental health crisis, and you bastards showed up and you killed him. And now you want more money because you're the mental health professional? Fuck you. Fuck you. And I hope Ezell Ford visits you tonight and hunts the shit out of you. How dare you show up here and ask for money for mental health? Leave it to Dr. Sharon. Leave it to the Office of Diversion and Reentry. You bastards do not qualify for no fucking inch of mental health professionalism. How you kill people and you fucking get away with it. Because Jackie Lacey allows you bastards to. Fuck you. You don't deserve a fucking penny of mental health dollars. These mental health people you're killing out here, and they want to hear you're getting money to take care of them? Fuck you. You don't deserve no fucking money for mental health diversion. There's plenty of social workers. That means getting the institutional change. Stop seeing public safety through policing. Boom! See public safety through mental health. Extend Dr. Sharon's office. Extend the Department of Public Health. And guess what that does? It takes Tweety Bird over here. You have to de-escalate.
Next speaker, please.
Next Clint Blakely.
Sir, your time's up. Thanks. Next speaker. Sir, you can come back during public comment.
Confronted a young black man named Ezell Ford one evening as part of an investigative stop. In other words, because he was black. It was 8:20 p.m. I walk around my neighborhood, alone much later than 8:20 p.m. I've never been part of an investigative stop. This young black man, about my age, was well known by the community and by the police officers in the area to have been mentally ill. They stopped him because apparently he was in a gang area, in other words, a black neighborhood, and he may have had drugs on him, according to officer testimony. This man made, according to officer testimony, suspicious movements. There was a taser in the vehicle, where in the officer's vehicle, neither officer brought the taser. One officer brought his gun. It's like they already had the plan of what was going to happen. According to testimony, Ford attacked the officers. Even if this attack was unprovoked, there's a taser in the car right there. But instead, they just had a pistol. As we all know, this confrontation ended in Ford's murder. Of course, neither officer was convicted. So let's talk about this report. Let's talk about de-escalation. So some tactics that we can start. Stop doing these investigative stops in black neighborhoods. At least leave the pistol in the car and bring the taser with you when you exit the vehicle. Unless you address these issues, more black, brown, and poor mentally ill folks are going to be murdered at the hands of police.
Is that it? Next speaker. We have a motion for approval of item number 2E. Second? All in favor? Anyone opposed? 5-0. Let's go to report of the chief. Chief Grimala, thank you.
Yes,
thank you very much.
Good morning, Commissioners.
Morning, Chief.
Homicides citywide as of Monday, March 4th, year to date, are down 28.89%. That equates to 13 less victims as compared to this time in 2018. We're also down year to date in the number of shooting victims, down 5.65%. That's 117 versus 124 in 2018. Year-to-date gang-related homicides are down 48%, but gang-related shots fired are up 9.4%, so that challenge continues. Citywide Part 1 crime through March 2nd is down 8.7%, with specificity to violent crime citywide year-to-date being down 8.9%. Even in the area of property crime, which challenges us as well, we are down 8.6% citywide. With regard to traffic collisions, fatal traffics are down citywide year-to-date 13.2%. And while we acknowledge that it's still early in the year, we are giving a increased emphasis on looking at traffic-related serious injuries, which are called A traffics and K traffics, those where someone perishes, giving it an increased priority throughout this year, also with the support of the Office of the Mayor and Vision Zero funding. As we look at officer-involved shootings year-to-date, we are down 75%. At this time in 2018, we had 8 officer-involved shootings. This year, they number 2. As we look at sworn personnel on payroll, 10,043 for sworn. Civilian personnel, 2,998. We are still carrying 406 civilian vacancies. Cadets number 1,428. Currently, we have 443 young people in our cadet academy, and reserves, we are looking at a total of 364, and that concludes my report.
Thank you, Chief. Any questions of the Chief? Okay, do we have public comments?
We have 3 comment cards. We have Mr. Herman, Michael Novick, and Audrey George. Apologize, there's more cards. Kayutsumi and Reverend. We have 5 cards. Mr. Herman?
You know, when Herman's strolling around and stuff, just call someone else, please, and let him slow up the meeting. Go ahead, Herman.
So you heard Chief of Police report. Murder's up, crime is up, burglary's up. Everything is up in this city when it comes to violence. Yet Mr. Sobroff laughs about it.
She just said everything was down.
And Miss Beatrice and her rank and file have to work so hard to protect public safety. They work so hard and out of their capacity to show compassion, but yet crime is up. So that we can attract the Olympics, so you can believe that you come from the East Coast or across from the ocean to see the Olympics, the grand finale. But I demand we have the FBI, ICE, and every government here to protect public interest, because our safety is at risk. For example, we didn't talk about the officer who was disciplined by his evaluation of incompetence to leave his car abandoned, and he simply got demoted. That's an interest of the public. That relates to our safety. But the evaluation by a jackass, shithole, stupid Steve Sobroff laughs about it.
Who's next?
Michael Novick.
Michael Novick.
Followed by Audrey George.
Yeah, I wonder if the chief would care to comment on the demotion of Jeff Nolte. It was reported in the press that it took place this week, but was retroactive to February 17th. To refresh memory, he's the former commander who was in charge of the Force Investigation Division and was himself involved previously in 5 shootings, at least one of them fatal, who apparently committed perjury under oath in the civil suit brought around one of those shootings, and abandoned his vehicle outside of the city of Los Angeles. The sheriffs found the vehicle. Looked as if it had been in a car crash of some kind and lost a tire. And LAPD came in and took over the investigation from the sheriffs. I'm wondering if anything public can be said about the results of that investigation, or why it was taken away from the sheriffs and taken over by the LAPD, and why there was only a demotion and not a dismissal.
Audrey George, followed by Kai Utsumi.
Yeah, so things that weren't in the chief's report, such as that demotion, such as the fact that there's been no report of any investigation of the fact that somebody could crash their car, be reported by numerous witnesses to have driven recklessly on the freeway in that crashed car, and then abandoned it. I believe that any civilian would have been arrested, because clearly you are looking at something like a DUI or anyway, I believe that we are due some sort of explanation of the status of that matter. And another thing that's not in the report is how the hell are decisions made about staffing divisions, such as the Force Investigation Division? Is it just darkly ironic or evil or stupid that you would put somebody who cost the city $2 million because he lied on the witness stand under oath about a force investigation, about his experience with that particular one? How would you put someone like that in charge of Force Investigation Division? How would you put someone who has killed 2 people at least and had 5 use of force incidents on his record? How would you put that person in charge? Is that supposed to be a role model for that division? Someone who can clearly police that division and oversee it?
How come the police chief's report has nothing to do with all the police killing of unarmed black and brown people, actually murder with impunity? What happened? How did Waukesha Wilson commit suicide in LAPD custody? With a 9-inch piece of rope, string. How did she? Why doesn't the police? What happened to Eric Rivera? They're trying to get LAPD video, but they're secret. Why are they secret? And you talk about constitutional police when you're so damn secret. It's a farce. LAPD is a farce. It needs a total cleanup. They have too much money. And their authoritarian attitude because they have a badge and a ranking and a gun. They will never be constitutional.
The Reverend is the last card I have.
I can't believe, I'm sure many of y'all up here have degrees. That means you're choosing to not ask her the hard questions. So shame on you. I'm already expecting that of you. Because what they just said was very important. Jeff Nolte is also over police-involved shootings. Does that not alarm y'all? He's being treated in a differential way than everyday citizens who also get shot by the police? And police officers don't get held accountable? Does that not shake you over there? What is your name?
Sir, why don't you stay behind the
Hey, shut up,
microphone?
overall.
Sir, why don't you stay behind the microphone? Why don't you stay behind the microphone?
Why does it not shake you, Figueroa Villa? Why aren't you fucking shaking? Look at your dumb ass. Sitting there like a fucking mannequin.
Sir, your zipper's down.
Your fucking dignity is down.
No, just
Your
let me
morality
know.
is down. Shut the fuck up. This is fucking serious. This is life and fucking death. You bastards don't take that shit into consideration until after someone is fucking dead. Take that shit into consideration. 75% down. But the grief is not down. The trauma is not down. The poverty is not down. Think more responsibly, like a fucking human being. When she considers people percentages, try to humanize these people. They have families, they have moms, siblings. They have penises. You're not so worried about my fucking fly. They have penises. That's what these fuckers are fucking doing.
Okay, is that,
We have no other comment cards on this item, sir.
do we go to, are we public comment now?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
We have 12 cards. The first three, Mr. Herman, Kayutsumi, and Jesse Weschler.
Good grief. P045298 programmatic housing, and who has helped me get off the fucking street and get a real fucking job? Where's your counselors? Where's your police to provide me mental health? Not one motherfucker engages to assist me except for Beatrice, the only person sitting there listening to my grief. Why the fucking Hollenbach pulled me out of my house in 2012, drugged me to your station while I was handcuffed, fucked me up, and then dragged me to your Metropolitan Clubhouse and fucked me up again while I was suffering from a PTSD, motherfucker. Why is that? Why do I have to go through the emotional harm and stress of all this fucking reality? Because the people here are right. I'm an American citizen and I got fucking rights of due process. But you listen to fucking lies and more lies, and you took me out of my fucking house, out of my environment, and made me the motherfucker I am. 666, you motherfuckers. And I'm coming one day out of my mind to avenge God's word and make sure faggot homosexuals like that motherfucking developer son knows what it's like to go to hell. God hates homosexuals as much as I do. I believe in one thing, God and God only. And God forsake you motherfuckers for killing people for nothing at all other than the color of your fucking skin, Sobrov. Fuck you, I'm not anti-Semitic like you. You hate all mankind, motherfucker. Hate is you. Trump, Trump, Trump. Fuck you.
Kayutsumi, please.
Next speaker, please.
Kayutsumi.
Constitutional policing. That's, when you have 5 members of the police commission picked by the same person, one person picks all 5 members of the police commission, and he also picks the chief of police. That's constitutional. That's not we the people. That's one-man rule. One-man rule. That's more dictatorship than a constitutional. It's all BS. So all your fancy words don't amount to a hill of beans of shit. Nothing.
The next speaker, Jesse Weschler, followed by Mr. Novick, Michael Novick.
Hi. When I came to this building, I was a little afraid. There was, I guess you got all the extra police officers here and moved to the front because from the street, there was a whole line of about a half dozen police officers standing at the posts where you have to walk into the building. I had about that much room to walk through. I was afraid. I mean, I was kind of nervous about it. I don't know why you had extra police there. Maybe it was for intimidation, maybe. Why is this building here? You don't work for the police, do you? It says Los Angeles Police Department here. But you don't work for the police, right? Don't you work for I don't know, the city hall? Is that where you should be? I think you should move this work to the city hall and find another place. We won't hurt anybody. I have a background in disability advocacy. I have supported about 20 plus years working with people with disabilities. I was given 3 times the government, excuse me, I lose words sometimes. But I have done things that will not hurt anybody here, honestly. If you need to have the people here, do it in City Hall. There's a much nicer building there, and you don't belong working for, I think you work maybe to keep an eye on the police, but you don't work for the police.
The next speaker, Michael Novick.
Michael Novick.
Yeah, I'll follow up on what Jesse just said, as I do almost every week. I think these meetings should not take place in the police administration building. They should take place in the evenings in the community. And I say it every week because every week you persist in a meeting here inside the police administration building surrounded by a phalanx of police. It intimidates people, as you just heard. It prevents people from coming. You need to meet on the weekends or after working hours in different parts of the city so that people from those parts of the city can come and express themselves to you and you can respond to them. And I think you should revise your rules of order so that in response to public comment, the board responds. I think it's kind of absurd to sit there like bumps on a log and say nothing except if your feelings are hurt and then you object to somebody lying about you. So, I think you need to think seriously about how you could actually fulfill the role of oversight that you claim you're doing. Every one of these reports we talked about, you missed the point of the report. You missed the point that the attempt to divert suicide calls was about the fact that the LAPD is involved in so-called suicide by cop, which is killing people who are in mental distress. You missed the fact that the racial disparity in the women who were taken out of human trafficking reflects a racial disparity in who the LAPD is arresting for pimping, pandering, and prostitution in the first place. And you miss everything because you're not out in the community hearing from the people in the community about their real-life concerns. So I don't know when your next scheduled general public meeting is, but I think it should be next week, and I think it should be every week thereafter. You should move out of this building, have your meetings in the weekends or on the evenings in the community with a lot of public advance notice so that people can come and let you know what the hell is going on.
The next 2 speakers, Jamie Garcia and John Avalos.
So I originally wanted to speak about how shameful it was that you actually moved Grishario Mack's hearing to the 12th when you damn well know what's happening on the 12th. So really shame on you that you're going to make their family wait this long. to hear when you know that so much community is mobilizing. But I couldn't let Sandra Figueroa get away with her comment. And, you know, I started kind of really studying policing, especially when I got involved in the predictive policing campaign, which, Sobroff, you shake your head, but I'm sure you don't know anything about criminological theories. So I wanted to speak to rational choice, which is one of the theories that, you know, promotes predpol. And rational choice basically says that people choose to do what they do because they just choose. You know, they know all the circumstances and they just break the law, right? And that's why people do what they do. Like our bootstraps aren't long enough to pull ourselves up from conditions that we are living under. But Sandra, you really invisibilize the decision makers, the policies, the laws that create the conditions of poverty in our community. And I know you sit there acting like, you know, you're not concerned with what the community has to say, but you know the conditions of poverty that we're living in. You know the conditions in Boyle Heights. You know the conditions in South Central, yet you want to reduce yourself to a comment of black and black violence, a comment of brown on brown violence in the coding of gangs. The coding of words that have been used time and time again to criminalize our communities and invisibilize the decision makers that have caused the situations that exist in our communities. Do you know, just last week, we had a triage in our hospital because we don't have enough money or enough beds to serve the communities. LA County was shut down for several days. And you know they have a $1.8 billion budget. You see your people starving, yet you sit here. You sit here and you blame them. You blame them. I hope they all know that you blame them. I hope they all know you're
John Avalos. John Avalos, followed by Jeffrey and Gina Viola.
Hi, everybody. As I was telling you, I went to the Jesse Romero trial every day. But all his defense had, I mean, the defense of the officers that shot him, the lawyers, all they had to mention is gang member. He's a gang member. That's all they had to say, Sandra. And that's it. The jury was convinced that the youth, the 14-year-old child, had deserved to be chased down that busy Boyle Heights business area, chased. You saw they were just chasing him for like they were having fun, like they came out of the Afghanistan war, these cops. Apparently they were gang units. But that's why the trial was lost. The officers got off. And that's the trial where the officer that shot, he hid his camera to make sure that the camera wouldn't catch the kid going like this. But still, we lost the trial, Sandra. You finally talk after 3 years, and why is everybody kicking your butt, Sandra? You never spoke for 3 years. I came here because of Waukesha Wilson, and we still don't have the answers for her. Oh, my God. So there's just a lot that need to be resolved, I think. Oh, next week I'm going to tell you what happened when I went to the Jimmy Gomez, Sandra, the Jimmy Gomez community event last week. And I got the drawing where my question came up. I only have 5 seconds. But I'll tell you next week. What happened there is amazing. I'll tell you about it.
The next speaker, Jeffrey, followed by Gina Viola and Hamid Khan.
It seems like the Waukesha Wilson subject is something that is on the minds of the people. So I felt maybe I would speak to that. I read the report of the previous chief regarding what went on there. My interpretation or my impression of what it was that there is an insecurity within the city and this country and the system, so to speak, about what it is, what it's doing, where it's going, whatever it is that makes people insecure. And for those reasons, a decision was made to lynch someone within the Los Angeles City facilities in order to show the people who's the boss. I'm not in charge of the system. I don't have that kind of power, but I would think that there's a better way to do things with all of the resources at your disposal, as far as surveillance, weapons, money, brains, universities. I would think that there's some way that you could do better. There's a quote that was bouncing around in my head from a communications theorist, I believe, from the 60s, and he said, all forms of violence represent at their core a search for identity. Oh, no, sorry, that's the wrong guy, but that's a good quote anyway. All forms of violence at their core represent a search for identity. So from my point of view, the system which you represent is engaged in a search for identity. And I think basically the message that you're getting here today is that there's better ways for you to go about that process of determining what you're going to do tomorrow.
So when I came in today, I was asked for my ID. And when I pushed back and asked for an explanation about why, I was told because that's common practice. I've been coming for 2 years. It's the first time I've been asked for my ID. So I can only imagine it's to check off a box because ID was asked from only black people last week. And that was brought up at the meeting. So clearly you're following up with that, just randomly asking me for ID today for the first time in 2 years. A day like today touches almost all areas of policing. Immigration enforcement, you have no business there. Human trafficking, no mention of your own cadet program and the abuses taking place there. Right? Use of force, no mention of Eric Rivera, no mention of anyone else. Mental health, Grishario Mack having a mental episode walking around a shopping mall with a small kitchen knife. Security in the mall didn't even call police because they knew what might happen to him. That's something I just learned. I didn't know that. Someone else called police so that they could come rushing in and kill him. So we heard audits on all of these areas of policing. The only thing missing today was your criminalization of the houseless. So at least you spared us one thing today. But what we heard at the end of all these very meatless audits was training, training, training. More training, more money for training. What happens at the police academy? Is that not a school for police? Are you not training people there? I'm almost speechless about it, but you said 48% down on gang violence. 48% down, yet gang shootings are up. I don't understand how those numbers correlate, but I also know that we need to stop targeting gangs as the reason that the LAPD exists.
Hamid Khan, followed by Eugene.
I think today was, in a way, pretty enlightening as well, because it's still unfortunate that we come here with expectations. We come here with expectations that they can even attempt to do anything right. But we are constantly reminded by the sheer vulgarity of Figueroa, by the sheer racist grossness of Sandra Figueroa, that how deep institutional racism and structural racism runs. And for us to then come back and have these expectations that they can do something different, I mean, I think it's not only naive, it's harmful to our health. It's a trauma that we all deal with. So I think, first of all, we need to strike that expectation out of our whole being that these folks can ever attempt to do something. I mean, I like the question that somebody asked earlier, that do you work for the police? And that gentleman right there, just very simply, it's a very simple question. And the answer is yes. The answer is yes. When the Christopher Commission report came out after Rodney King, one of the key things that the Christopher Commission report said was that the police department, LAPD, should operate like a corporation. So we have to think of them as the board of directors. We have to look at them whose only interest would be to protect them, and them. So I think it is so self-contradictory itself that for us to expect that this civilian oversight even represents civilian or the people. So I think we come here not expecting anything, but we come here to expose you.
That's right.
We come here to discredit you.
That's right.
We come here to neutralize you. Because what we had said several years ago, that you are the shot.
Next speaker.
Eugene.
Eugene.
And the last thing I want to say to Senator Figueroa.
Next speaker, please. Your time's up. You can speak next week, but your time's up now, so you can sit down, or I'm going to ask you to leave. Or I'm going to ask you to leave the meeting. Sir, you can sit down. Sir, he can leave the room. You can escort him out. You can escort him out. You can escort him out. Goodbye. Yeah. Bye. Goodbye. Next speaker. You're ceding your time. Next speaker then.
Eugene, followed by Lucas Martin.
Lucas Martin. Lucas Martin. Is Martin here?
I don't know. Is Lucas Martin here?
Yeah, come on up. Come on up. Mr. Martin, it's your turn. Mr. Khan, you can go out of the room, please, sir. Next. No, you're not leaving. Go leave. Yeah. Sir, you ceded your time, so the next speaker, please. Well, you did it. I didn't do it. Yeah, it was legal. No. No. Next speaker, please. Next speaker.
The next speaker, Lucas Martin.
Mr. Martin.
You're supposed to put 2 minutes on the clock and allow him to speak. Isn't that the process?
No. No. Yes. Sir, do you want your two? I'm going to get. Be quiet. I'm going to give you back your 2 minutes. Okay, turn on the 2 minutes for this guy. What's his name?
Eugene, is that your name?
Eugene, 2 minutes. Your turn. Go ahead.
Give me the 2 minutes. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Sobrov. That was very nice of you. You do have a soul. You do have a spirit. I thought it was dead inside, but there you have it. There's something inside, Sobrov. There's still a chance. There's still a chance for you to maybe see the light, see something, bigger than yourself. Because right now, I think a lot of us, well, I'm going to speak for myself, there is no hope for you, Sobrov, and I want you to know that again, I'm going to repeat what I had said to you several weeks back, and I'll tell you once again to remind you that there are consequences to these actions. There is eventually going to be a consequence for allowing people to be murdered time and time again, for greenlighting that and sanctioning it. You have to understand, if you are a person of God, if you believe in God. Do you believe in God, Sobrov? You don't have to answer. You can nod and yes or no if you don't want to answer. Do you believe in God? Do you, Steve? And if you do believe in God, do you believe that God would want you to allow people, God would be okay with greenlighting murder, with greenlighting violence, with greenlighting rape, and allowing an institution to get away with it, and you having the power to change that and doing nothing about it? Steve, what do you think is going to happen for allowing this to happen? If you believe that there is justice, if you believe in karma, say you don't believe in God, but you believe that there is karma, and there is karma. The universe has said and spoken many times to prove that there is karma. And if you believe that there is consequence to your actions, then understand that this will eventually come back and bite you in the ass, and this is going to be your responsibility. Everybody here should also be saying something, but it seems like everybody here is scared of you, or I'm not sure what their deal is, but I would hope that eventually maybe you guys can speak up and speak some sense into him, because otherwise it's going to reach all of you guys as well. There's going to be a price to pay, because this is Rome.
Thanks for your comments. Next speaker, please. Next speaker.
The next speaker is Lucas Martin, followed by Reverend.
Mr. Martin.
Hello. On November 6th, the election day,
Chief of Police said that the right to vote is often taken for granted. And I want to speak today about this mental evaluation unit and the 5 people who voted in favor of it, that you should be ashamed of yourselves. You have the right to vote in this case. You have a power that we get once a year, once every 2 years, 4 years. You have it every week for oversight to represent the city and the people. And you heard what we had to say. You're nodding. I'm surprised to see you nodding.
I agree with what you said.
Yeah. You took your vote for granted. You had the right to take this down. You have no business in mental health. I'm a registered substance use counselor. I have a bachelor's in psychology. I'm working through this process. You people have no business there. I've worked with so much. And it's a lesson. It's been a lesson for me that your people shouldn't be called in situations. It's a part of my training that you shouldn't be there because you can kill people. And if you move forward with this, because I see that today was just kind of an investigation into whether you'll go through, if you do it, you will see murders, and you 5 who approved it will be partially responsible for the rest of your lives. You should hold that. But that's just what happens under the leadership that you have now. And that's what this commission is it's a rubber stamping commission. I've said it before, and it's under your leadership, Commissioner Soboroff, that this consistently happens. There is no justice here. Shame. Just shame.
That's it. That's it. You can bring all the most educated people up here. You can bring the most religious people up here. You can bring the most expert, wise people up here. Talk to these bastards. And they sit there with their damn head down, Figueroa Villa, ignoring truth, ignoring facts, just so you can feel comfortable and go home today. But guess who's not going home? Over 450 people have been killed by the Los Angeles Police Department, Los Angeles Sheriff's Department. And who has done anything to try to hold these cops accountable? One of y'all raise your hand. None of you bastards can raise your hand. That's the fucking problem. Your action is indicative of what you're doing right now. Sitting there with your mouths closed, waiting to see how much money is sitting in your bank account. No type of sincerity towards people's lives. And they're right. You're right. They're right. These people, human beings, have souls. Human beings have energy. And I do believe that people come back from the grave and speak from the grave to hunt bastards like you all that refuse to do something and hold people accountable. And Bonner, those questions you asked about the Met, you should be asking about the police report. What were the demographics of a lot of these arrests, right? Where was the de-escalation pattern in any of these arrests? Where were those questions? They were hidden in your immorality. Y'all fucking suck. You fucking suck. And you're right. If I see any of you on the street, I'm going to protest the shit out of you. I can't wait till I see y'all somewhere public speaking. I can't wait. I'm going to disrupt the shit out of you.
Next speaker.
We have no other speakers for public comment. We're now on item number 5, closed session. We have Michael Novick and Paula Miner.
On 5A1?
5A1, sir.
Okay. Novick?
Mario Mack, so we'll talk about that another time. I think what Jamie said is shameful that you postponed it to a week. It has a really full agenda, focusing on something else, and let the family wait a little longer. I want to talk about, again, the general attitude that you have towards these cases. This is officer-involved shooting number 23, case number 23 of 2018. So you're catching up a little bit. That it's a shooting that took place on April 9th, and here it's in March. But there's sort of a catch-22 in this whole thing. On the one hand, you don't look at the pattern in practice, the systemic nature of this violence. You say you're looking at each individual case and determining on its merits of each individual officer. But you rubber stamp, you almost never find anybody out of policy. You you had a rare decision that part of the incident with Ezell Ford was out of policy, but not the actual shooting of Ezell Ford. So, you know, the other side of it is you don't look at the pattern and the practice of these killings and shootings over and over again. So I want to commend to you a website. Maybe you're not familiar with it. I didn't know about it until I learned from Adam Smith, who you kicked out of the meeting earlier. But the website is called lapdshootings.com. And it lists LAPD shootings year by year and the officers involved. And the officers whose names are in red are the ones who've had multiple shootings, either prior to the incident in that year or subsequent to it. So take a look at it, lapdshootings.com. And it's broken down year by year. The high year, honestly, is not this year. It was, I think, 2011. 2011, 2012, they're up around the 160, 140 shootings a year by the LAPD. So that's a systemic problem. Now, you've reduced it a little bit, and that's commendable. There was no shooting, apparently, to report this week again. But that's a...
Paula Minor. And we do have an additional card, sir.
I am speaking on the closed session process. You know, after sitting through today, it's just really difficult to come before this body. You know, I've watched you go back and forth with the public. I've watched you look with disdain, even sober off with annoyance. And I question why we come, but this is where we're supposed to comment. Black Lives Matter wants to comment on policies and procedures, so we will be here. I just want to talk about what happened on this closed session issue. It's an example of the lying, the insensitivity of the LAPD. The family, liaison staff called the family of Grisharo Mack on Friday and told them their son's murder was going to be considered today. In that call, Officer Wilkins warned them to watch out for Black Lives Matter people like me who, if they are present, they might cause your family not to be able to speak. You know, as if Black Lives Matter has not supported this family for nearly a year, has not shared information, shared resources, called family liaison and told them to call them and explain procedures, gotten them a forensic specialist. So I just want to put that out so you, Steve Silvero, understand what your people are doing, the people that you rubber stamp and pat on the back every time. Then also, that family then started calling all their family members, their relatives, their friends, their advocates to come today. Then on Sunday, he calls back and tells them the item will not be on the agenda because not enough commissioners will be present. Today we have full commission, all 5. This, again, is the sensitivity, the lying, you know, the things that destroy community trust among all people. And I just want to let you know there's no sensitivity, no truth, but Black Lives Matter will continue to show up, and we will continue.
Next speaker.
Reverend.
NWA court is in full effect. Judge Gray residing. In the case of NWA versus the police department, prosecuting attorneys are MC Ren, Ice Cube, and Easy motherfucking.
Off topic. Okay, we're going to go to closed session.
The Board of Police Commissioners will now recess into closed session to discuss item number 5A1 in accordance with Government Code 54957. The Board of Police Commissioners has concluded its work in closed session. We are back in open session. In closed session, item number 5A1 was discussed and the Chief's recommendations were unanimously adopted. Is there a motion to adjourn, ma'am?
Is there a second? All in favor? Aye. All right, that concludes the meeting of the March 5th Board of Police Commissioners. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Cindy, and I'm in Little Tokyo, and you're watching Channel 35, Your City, Your Channel.